This week on The Watchman, President Trump has put the Iranian regime on notice. How will this impact the world's top sponsor of terrorism? And what about the notorious Iran nuclear deal? Top Israeli official Michael Oren joins us in Jerusalem to break it down.
Every which way, Iran is aiming to take over the Middle East, and the Iran nuclear deal does nothing to stop that. On the contrary, it frees up hundreds of billions of dollars in sanction release and makes this regime very wealthy.
Plus, Israel isolated? Think again. Hear how Israel is gaining new friends and sharing its blessings around the world. It's The Watchman. It's Christians united for Israel only on TBN. And welcome to The Watchman. Israel is alone, isolated, an island unto itself, in constant defiance of the international community. Folks, that has been the constant drumbeat of the mainstream media for years. And guess what? It couldn't be further from the truth. Here at The Watchman, we like to bring you real news. And here it is. Israel has never had more friends and more opportunities in the world than it does right now. We've told you here on the show in recent weeks about the great bond between the Trump administration and the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Earlier this year, President Trump became the first U.S. president to pray at the Western Wall. But it goes much deeper than that. In the span of 1 year, Prime Minister Netanyahu has visited 6 continents. In September, he became the first Israeli Prime Minister to ever visit Latin America. From Africa to India to even some Muslim nations like Azerbaijan, Israel is increasingly being seen not as a cause of, but a solution to the chaos going on in the world today. In Houston, in Mexico City, when there is a natural disaster in the world, Israelis are on the ground lending their expertise. Medical, scientific, high-tech, Israel is at the forefront of innovation in all of these fields, blessing the world. And the world is noticing. In his recent speech before the UN General Assembly, Prime Minister Netanyahu called it a revolution.
We're in the midst of a great revolution. A revolution in Israel's standing among the nations. This is happening because so many countries around the world have finally woken up to what Israel can do for them. Those countries now recognize what brilliant investors like Warren Buffett and great companies like Google and Intel, what they've recognized and known for years, that Israel is the innovation nation, the place for cutting-edge technology in agriculture, in water, in cybersecurity, in medicine, in autonomous vehicles, you name it. We've got it.
Folks, great things are happening in Israel today. And no one knows that better than Israel's former ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren. He's currently a leading member of the Israeli Knesset and a deputy minister in the office of Prime Minister Netanyahu. I sat down with Deputy Minister Oren recently at the Knesset in Jerusalem, where we discussed Israel's strengthening relationship with the United States and how it's gaining the upper hand in its struggle against anti-Israel forces around the world. Take a look. Deputy Minister, thanks for joining us in your neck of the woods here in Jerusalem.
It's always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I was so used to spending some time with you in Washington as well when you were ambassador to the U.S., top diplomat to the U.S. You've written about that experience eloquently in your great book, Ally. What is your take now on the U.S.-Israel relationship, maybe reforging ties?
The Obama administration wasn't hostile to the state of Israel. I wouldn't say they're anti-Israel, but they did view Israel more as part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And the Trump administration, if I had to point at one major difference, they view Israel as part of the solution. The solution not just for the questions of peace, but for security, for the entire Middle East. They look at a Middle East that has completely fallen apart, and there's one country that is standing strong, democratic, unreservedly pro-American. That's the state of Israel. We saw after 2011, the outbreak of the Arab Spring, Arabs were killing Arabs in Syria, rioting in Egypt, the entire Middle East coming apart. And they had nothing at all to do with the state of Israel.
ISIS had nothing to do with Israel.
Yeah. And nothing to do with settlements. And we know that there was an Arab-Israeli conflict for 50 years before this first settlement was built. And then we know after that, Israel made repeated offers to make peace to the Palestinians in 2000 and 2008. The Palestinians turned it down, not because of settlements. The fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, Israel was willing to go back to the negotiating table with the Palestinians without preconditions at any time. And for the last 9 years now, the Palestinian Authority has refused to negotiate with us.
That's right. Another issue, obviously, was Iran. Another issue of difference, the Iran deal, which you spoke out against so eloquently, Deputy Minister. Tell us about the Iran situation now. I think a lot of people have been lulled to sleep saying, well, we have this deal and Iran is sticking to the letter of the law, so to speak. For an American audience in particular, talk about why Iran remains such a grave threat, not only for Israel, but for the West.
At the end of 8-9 years from now, Iran will get its entire nuclear program back online. It'll have legitimacy, and it can enrich uranium to a military-grade strength within a very short period of time, enough for 100 or maybe 200 bombs and nuclear bombs. The nuclear deal doesn't stop that. It actually paves Iran's path to the bomb. And the nuclear deal establishes no connection whatsoever between the deal and the nuclear program and Iranian behavior. So Iran is the world's largest state sponsor of terror. Iran openly called for the destruction of the state of Israel. It's a genocidal regime. Iran is complicit in the murder of 500,000 Syrians. It's trying to establish air bases, ports in Lebanon, Syria to create a land bridge between Iran and the Mediterranean. It's taken over Iraq. It's supporting Hamas to the west of us. It's in Yemen to the south of us. Every which way, Iran is aiming to take over the Middle East. And the Iran nuclear deal does nothing to stop that. On the contrary, it frees up hundreds of billions of dollars in sanction release and makes this regime very wealthy.
Yeah, and I think of that ballistic missile stockpile that Iran is developing as well, Deputy Minister. And I think of Iran's proxy Hezbollah. During the 2006 war, obviously, against Hezbollah, you spent time in the north. Talk about the severity of that Hezbollah threat, over 100,000 rockets and missiles aimed at every inch of Israel. How severe is that Hezbollah threat?
It's recently a no less objective source of the New York Times said Hezbollah has become the second largest military force in the Middle East after Israel's. And this is the development of the last few years. And we have much of that we have to thank to the Iran nuclear deal.
Yeah, this is not just a terrorist group. This is a terrorist army.
And they are fighting in Syria. They are advising in Iraq. They're advising in Yemen. And meanwhile, Iran continues to develop, as you said, an intercontinental ballistic missile capacity, ICBMs. They don't need an ICBM to hit the state of Israel. They need an ICBM to hit where? Washington, D.C.
The great Satan.
Right, the great Satan. It's New York, it's California. Now, we've seen how the North Koreans have developed that type of ability to hit Denver, to hit the west coast of the United States. There was a report in the British news today that the Iran and North Korea, British officials saying that North Korea have worked far more closely than even the British thought. And this is just the beginning. This connection between Iran and North Korea is going to come out more and more.
Obviously, the 50-year anniversary of the reunification of Jerusalem, 70-year anniversary of the rebirth of the State of Israel. As a historian, you've written several best-selling books, a lot with a history focus. What does that mean to you?
We have a lot of anniversaries this year, and some very, very happy anniversaries indeed. The Balfour Declaration, 1917, was the declaration in which the British Empire, which had just defeated the Turks and liberated this area of the world, promised the land of Israel to the Jewish people as a national home. And in many ways, it was the height of our diplomacy. It was the first time the international community recognized the right of a Jewish people to a homeland in our tribal lands, the land of Israel. And that was in many ways the high watermark of our diplomacy. The partition resolution in 1947 divided this country into two states, an Arab state and a Jewish state. The Arabs rejected it. They went to war against the Jewish state. We won, they lost. That's why there is no Arab state there today. And the 67 War. 67 War was the reunification of Jerusalem, which had been divided by Israel's War of Independence in 1948, and that and also gave us secure borders. It gave us peace, ultimately with Egypt and Jordan, because we were able to trade territory for peace. And it also gave us the strategic alliance with the United States. Israel won the Six-Day War without a single American bullet. And after the war, it was only then that American policymakers decided to make a strategic alliance with us. And that has become the deepest and most multifaceted alliance which the United States has had with any country in its post-World War II period.
Talk about why you do what you do, why you made Aliyah, and why you're serving this vital role for the state of Israel.
Well, I grew up in a period of great unrest in the United States, the civil rights movement, the protest movements. I also grew up in a working class neighborhood where I was the only Jewish kid, and I was often the victim of anti-Semitism. My father and his brother had both landed on Normandy Beach, and they had liberated a concentration camp. They took pictures of that concentration camp. I have them on my phone. Every time I'd come home bloodied from a fight with anti-Semites, my father would show me the pictures of the concentration camp and say, "You see, that's why we need a strong state of Israel." And it had a big impact on me. I started coming here when I was a kid. I was a farmer. I was a cowboy. So a cowboy, I used to ride up cattle on horseback on the Golan Heights, which was wild. And I just always thought of myself as being extraordinarily fortunate to be alive in the time of my people's history where we did have this state, where we can sit in this institution, we're in the Knesset here, and have a sovereign flag that represents a strong people with a formidable army.
That's right. It's a modern-day miracle.
It is indeed.
Deputy Minister, thank you so much.
Okay.
Up next, in the shifting sands of the Middle East, Israel is gaining some important new allies. A top official in Prime Minister Netanyahu's Likud party joins us to explain. Don't move.
Israel faces growing threats on all sides. Hezbollah, ISIS, Iran, and Hamas never cease their attacks. But God has raised CUFI up at this moment in history to stand between Israel and those who seek to destroy the Jewish state.
Israel's enemies are on the move. As dark clouds gather on the horizon, tell the world you proudly stand with Israel. Be a courageous voice for biblical unity and moral clarity when you join Christians United for Israel. Show your love for the people of Zion with this beautiful symbol of unending support for Israel.
Wear the pin and join CUFI, a movement of over 3.5 million defenders of Israel. Call the number on your screen or visit CUFI.org/pin to receive your free pin that will show your proud support for the special bond between Israel and America.
And welcome back. When it comes to explaining Israel's growing influence in the world, no one does it better than Eli Hazan. He's the Foreign Affairs Director for Prime Minister Netanyahu's Likud party, and I sat down with him recently in Jerusalem to discuss how Israel is winning its war against the haters and gaining new allies around the world. Take a look. The Saudis, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Gulf states, they're not so much seeing Israel as a threat anymore as they are Iran. Can you talk about some of the common interest that Israel shares with its Sunni Arab neighbors in the region right now?
First of all, it's historically, because if you compare the situation right now, the political situation right now in Israel, than it used to be 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 60 years ago, it's something revolutionary, I would say. Now, we find out with the Sunni states that we have a lot of interest not only against Iran, but in general. We belong to the same sphere. We have the American alliance with Trump administration, and then we understood we have to work together. Now, Israel has been opened ever since I remember myself, and then the Sunni understood it as well. Of course, we need the American help, the Trump administration help against the agreement with Iran, and we cannot make it without the Americans. Some of the leaders of the world, such as Putin from Russia, I believe Merkel from Germany, they are pro-Israeli, I know that. But on the other hand, they give Iran more legitimacy. Right. And that's a problem. Not for the Israelis, for the world itself.
For the world, and now, Eli, that ISIS is being crushed slowly but surely in Syria, there will be a vacuum. And Iran is looking to fill that vacuum and have that land corridor from Tehran stretching all the way to the Mediterranean. And as you said, that's not just a threat to Israel, obviously on your doorstep, but to the world and to the West.
Exactly. This is why Netanyahu met with Putin a few times in the last years. In order to prevent this kind of threat, we must protect ourselves. This is what we do. This is our interest. And again, it goes with the interest of the United States.
Yoeli, in 2009, Prime Minister Netanyahu accepted the premise of a two-state solution. The Obama administration obviously hounded him relentlessly to make concessions to the Palestinians. Number one, what's the status of that now under the Trump administration? And number two, can you talk a bit about the Palestinian Authority incitement and that culture of hatred that makes any kind of a peace deal, at least for now, kind of improbable?
Ever since we created the Palestinian Authority in 1994, they've got $26 billion. It's twice than the Marshall Plan in the 1940s, which helped to rehabilitate Europe. What they do with the money, they do not create a Palestinian community. They invest a lot of terror, financing terrorist families, financing terrorists in prison in Israel. And of course, we disagree. We have nothing against the Palestinian citizens. We have to live together, and we invest a lot of efforts in order to promote the life of the Palestinian itself. Now, if you compare the life of the Palestinians and the Palestinian Authority to the all Arab states surrounding us, you cannot compare. I mean, their life is much better, and thank God for that. And it is very important for us because we are not against the Palestinians. We want to make sure that we are a secure country, and that's what we do.
Another major issue here in Israel and in the States that President Trump has talked about is moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to right here where we're sitting right now, Jerusalem, the U.S. Embassy. What are your thoughts on that?
I wish he will do it. I see that he postponed the decision for 6 months. I think it would be the best of all of us, because if the Americans will do it, then other embassies will go as well.
Sets the tone, it's a game changer.
Exactly, no doubt about it, and it has a huge significance of doing that, because when you transfer the embassy, you say one thing: Jerusalem is under the sovereignty of Israel. And again, it is very important because people forget, from 1948 to 1967, Jerusalem was divided. She was not secure, she was not safe, and only under the Israeli sovereignty we will be able to maintain the freedom of religion for Christians, for Muslims, for Jews as well. And I think the Americans should do it, and it will be a new direction for the region.
Christians in particular are being beheaded in Syria, in Iraq, in lands where they've lived for thousands of years, but they have safe haven here in Israel. Can you talk more about that? I think that's something, Eli, that Americans really need to know.
Take the Christians in Gaza. Not a lot of people know, but in 2007 they were under persecution from the Hamas regime. And Israel was the only place to absorb those who had to leave. And look what's happened. It's Egypt, Iraq, Syria, other places. And in order to save the Christians, you must support Israel.
There's a lot of talk that Israel's completely isolated. We have BDS, obviously, but that's not the case.
No,
and
not
you're
at
kind
all.
of at the forefront of this. Look, Israel's making inroads around the world. Tell us a bit about that.
There is a big distance between the image and reality. According to the image that mainly spread in the left wing in Israel, left-wingers in socialists in the world, that Israel is under, persecution, BDS and things like that.
An island in and of itself. No
exactly.
friends.
No, but if you take Netanyahu's policy, that's what Netanyahu understood in 2009, that we cannot rely anymore on one continent, on two continents, United States and Europe. Therefore, you must develop the relationship with other continents. China, India, Australia, Africa. In our days, he visits today I think he's in Mexico.
He's in Latin America, that's right.
Latin America, all over the place, all over the world. And this is part of the vision of Netanyahu before he came back to power in 2009.
Well, Eli, thanks so much for joining us here today in beautiful Jerusalem. Keep up the great work.
Thank you. You too.
It was great. Thanks again to Eli Hazan for joining us. And folks, be sure to check Eli out on Facebook. He is doing very important work. Well, coming up after the break, we live in lawless times, but there is hope. One California pastor joins us to tell us about the great hope after the break.
With over 3.5 million members, Christians United for Israel is the largest pro-Israel organization in America. And for Zion's sake, we will not remain silent. We won't stand for the lies and political attacks that threaten Israel's safety and the future of the Jewish people in their God-given homeland. We want you to join us in this sacred movement.
The Jewish people are not alone. Christians United for Israel, I want to thank you for standing up for Israel. I want to thank you for standing up and being counted. May God bless you all. Thank you.
Israel needs you to take a stand. Join Christians United for Israel. Make your voice heard and be remembered as a defender of Israel, the apple of God's eye.
And welcome back. Charlottesville, Las Vegas, Barcelona, London, ISIS terror, Iranian nukes, North Korea. Folks, we live in lawless times. But amid all the lawlessness, God is moving. These are also Bible times. And I sat down recently with CUFI member and pastor of Influence Church in California, Phil Hotzenpiller, to discuss his great new book, One Nation Without Law. What does all this lawlessness mean? And what is the great hope for you and me? Take a look.
We've always had a lawlessness. There's always been those who would rebel against God. But what we're seeing is an acceleration of that. What we've seen also is a great persecution of the Jewish people worldwide. We've seen them scattered literally all over the world, as far as Ethiopia, up into the northern parts of Russia, and literally around the world. But what we've also witnessed in our lifetime is a regathering of these people. That God in His faithfulness has brought Israel back together for a purpose and for a reason. That God might fulfill His destiny and His purpose for that nation. The Jewish people are very special to the heart of God. And God has protected them and guided them even in the midst of persecution. I've written a book called One Nation Without Law. And in that book, I illustrate and I give you some real data on the history of the nation and what you can expect in the days ahead. Jerusalem is the most highly contested piece of real estate on planet Earth. Have you ever wondered why? It's not because it's the most desirable from a physical standpoint. There is a spiritual dimension there. Behind the scene, we see spiritual warfare happening on a very, very high level because they're contending for that place where our Lord was crucified, where Abraham brought his own son Isaac, where we're going to see the return of the Lord Jesus Christ. The great hope that we find in our world is our hope in God. We can look to the Bible, the Word of God, and we can see that God has a plan for His people. That God is working even behind the scenes, even when we don't think He's working to bring about the fulfillment of all that He's planned for us. You don't have to be a person without hope. I want to encourage you to pray. I want to encourage you to look to God for your answers. I want to encourage you to get involved in your neighborhoods, in your communities around the world. Support great organizations like CUFI and be a part of what they're doing to help bring hope to the world and the fulfillment of God's promise.
Thanks again to Pastor Phil for joining us, and be sure to pick up his new book, One Nation Without Law. Well, coming up after the break, my final thoughts on how God is using Israel today to do mighty things. Stick around.
Long before he was the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence was a friend to Christians United for Israel. Now, he's helping us make Israel stronger and her people safer.
Pastor John Hagee, I thank you for your leadership on behalf of this nation and the Jewish state of Israel. And today, through Christians United for Israel, more than 3.3 million believers raised their voices, have not been silent in support of Israel. And you can be heard in every city and town across America and in every office on Capitol Hill. And rest assured, The man down the street at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue hears you too. I have faith that with God's help, and with the men and women gathered here, the best days for Israel and for America are yet to come.
Don't miss next year's summit. Join the movement and register now for the 2018 CUFI Washington Summit.
And welcome back. Folks, we hear so much negative news today, especially out of the Middle East. So I hope that today's show encouraged you. Great things are happening today in the land of Israel, and God is moving. He is using His people and His land as a light unto the nations. The world is increasingly turning to Israel for answers on how to fight disease, terrorism, famine, the growing water crisis, and so much more. If a cure for cancer or Alzheimer's is found in the next few years, it's a good bet that it will be found in Israel. The book of Zechariah says that a day is coming when 10 people from all languages and nations will take firm hold of one Jew by the hem of his robe and say, "Let us go with you, because we have heard that God is with you." Folks, our team at Christians United for Israel gets this. We get that God is using Israel in these Bible times in which we are living today. We're over 3.6 million members strong and growing every day. You see the website and the phone number on your screen, so join us. Join America's largest pro-Israel organization and be part of this mighty movement of God that is unfolding in Israel today. For Zion's sake, we will not remain silent. Well, thanks for joining us this week on The Watchman. Until next time, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.